Good afternoon and welcome to the Leicestershire and Rutland Police and Crime Panel. Thank you all for coming. Take the item one is the minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of June 2024, pages 3 to 10. Everyone happy with them for accuracy? Thank you. Item 2 is public question time. We've not received any public questions. Item 3, to advise of any other items which the chairman has decided to take as urgent elsewhere on the agenda. There are no other urgent items. And item 4, declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. Anything from any members? No? Okay, thank you. So on to item 5, the Police and Crime Commissioner's Annual Report 2023-2024. So over to you, Mr. Matthews.
Thank you, Chair. The first thing I'll do, if I may, is draw the panel's attention to the fact that although it's dated the 23rd of September 2024, it covers the previous financial year, so it's up until April of this year. So there are some rather important things have happened since then, which aren't covered in it. I suppose the most important of those, if we're looking forward to the future, is the election of a new government. Already we're getting indications that they're going to be wanting to change various things that affect both the role of the PCC and the police and various other bits and pieces that I'm responsible for as PCC. So not that I want to close down debate and discussion, but this doesn't cover any of that, unfortunately, because it would have been interesting to have a look. Now, I'm going to assume everybody has read the report, but nevertheless, I'm going to pull out a few bits and pieces which I consider to be important. So I think the main underlying one has got to be about the funding formula for the police. This is something that's been a running issue ever since I got into office, in that we're still running on a funding formula that is years old. The policing has changed, the nature of crime has changed, and a lot of the victim support and crime prevention work which I do has also changed, and yet it's still the case that we're running on a funding formula that was put together quite a long time ago, and that thrown up a few anomalies. Some police and crime commissioners actually do quite well out of this and end up with considerably more money per head of population than we get in Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. So I was lobbying the previous government on this quite vociferously. Sadly, I wasn't getting anywhere, neither were the other PCCs who were doing the same. But with the new government, we're going to have another go at it. But I thought that was worth pointing out. We also had, of course, the budget for the current financial year was set in the previous financial year. And again, that's referenced on page 16. So given that we were working under a very unfair funding formula, we did our best as outlined in the report. I decided that this financial year I would give additional support to the Chief Constable for the policing side of things. Going forwards, that's probably not going to be the case. There are other demands on the purse of a police and crime commissioner, so we might be looking at that all over again. For instance, support for victims is always important, and I managed to get some extra money from the Ministry of Justice to support the care that we give to victims. But I think crime prevention is going to be something important going forward. We did do some additional crime prevention in the year that this annual report covers. I think that's going to be increasingly important, as is work we do with violence against women and girls. And although I'm not talking about the current year, the new Labour government is making quite a lot of noise in the system about what they want to do with violence against women and girls. All that's open to consultation at the minute, but we will look at what's coming. I think something which I'll be drawing out in the forward, which I need to write for this, haven't written that yet because I wanted to make sure the body of the report was complete first, is the importance of looking at creating safe and viable communities. And there are different aspects to that. Again, we touch on the work with business crime and retail theft and so on. To make sure that a community is safe and viable, it has to have a flourishing economy. It has to have public spaces that are safe. It has to have shops which are profitable and that people can shop in safely. That's going to demand, I think, a much more holistic approach, working with partners, and not just partners within the public sector, but also within the private sector and the charity sector. I can see that being increasingly important, and we've been trying to lay the foundations for that in the year here. You will see there are some important case studies here which have been brought forwards as an example of what we're doing. I've also got to mention the Violence Reduction Network. Over the past few years, that has been an absolute pillar of the work that is being done across our city and 2 counties to reduce serious violence. And of course, we have the serious violence duty has also come on stream. But the Violence Reduction Network and the work that they do is key in trying to get hold of people who are at risk of getting involved in crime, getting involved in violent crime, and making sure that they don't go down those paths. No system is perfect, of course, but the work they do, I think, has been outstanding. And if I may, Chair, put on record at this point my thanks to Grace Strong, who heads up the Violence Reduction Network, for all the work that they've been doing. Of course, an important part of my job is connecting with the different communities that we have across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. I am the democratically elected representative of the people, as most of you are, and I take it very seriously that doesn't just mean you go to someone at election time and say, please vote for me. It's important to stay in touch with our communities throughout, to listen to what people have to say to me, to answer their queries and deal with their concerns. I take great pride in the work that I do in that respect, and that's outlined in this annual report as well. So, like I say, I assume everyone's read everything. I just wanted to highlight a few bits and pieces. Final thing I have to say is to pay tribute both to the Chief Executive of the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner, who does a huge amount of work on the professional side of things, and also to my Deputy, Rani Mahal, without whose support it would have been difficult to get through this year that we're talking about. So thank you for the opportunity to introduce this, Chair. Like I say, I assume everybody's read it, but of course, as usual, if there are any questions, be delighted to do my best to answer them.
Thank you. And I think I'll just add to your comments about the VRN. I've worked with Grace for the last 5 years, and she's a fantastic lead for the VRN, and they've just celebrated their 5th anniversary. So I know we're in a difficult stage about funding going forward, where we go from that. So I hope we do get some funding to carry on that, because it has been, we are now seeing the impact. It's not a short hit, is it? It's a long-term programme. So right. We are starting to see that hit now. Okay, questions from panel? Thelma.
Thank you. And thank you for your report. It was quite encouraging to read some of the accolades and awards from as compared to sort of national and other regions. So that was quite encouraging. Just a couple of minors, and I'm not sure if they need to be put into the main report, but it's just for my information. But on page 22, where it references the national increase in shoplifting, I just wanted to know what the benchmark was. What is the national increase, if you have that information? But I'm sure I can glean that on a Google search, probably yielded.
Yeah, I don't have the national figures to hand, I'm afraid. I think we're probably looking at if it hasn't doubled, it's very close to having doubled in the past 2 or 3 years. It has been a very significant increase. And also increasing along with that is assaults on shop staff and verbal abuse towards shop staff. I was over in the Beaumont Leys shopping centre 3 or 4 weeks ago, and as I do when I'm shopping, you know, if I've got time, I let people know who I am. As it turned out, only about 3 hours before I got there, a person had pulled a knife on a member of shop staff at that shopping centre. And of course, the police have been very good. They'd got there quickly and they'd made an arrest and everything. But it is an appalling indictment of where this is going. And one of the things that I want to take up with the Home Office is that at the moment, assaults on or attempted assaults or threatening behaviour towards shop staff aren't recorded separately. And so we've actually got no way of knowing across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland how many assaults there are on shop staff. The only way to do it would be to get out a map, look at where assaults are plotted on a map and look which ones are happening in shopping streets. And of course, if you can't measure it, it's difficult to be able to put in place measures to stop it from happening in future and so on. So that's one of the things I'll be lobbying is that we do actually get a separate reporting code for assaults on shop staff, because anecdotally I'm picking up that there's been a huge increase in that, as well as the increasing theft from shops that we can actually measure.
Thank you. That would be actually quite interesting, because obviously it affects footfall and nighttime economy, etc. I had another question, if that's okay. On page 23, talking about the cyber crime and the various other national threats, regarding the cyber attack on Leicester City Council on the 7th of March, and I appreciate you can't sort of go into details around that, especially as investigations are still ongoing, but is the OPCC working with City Council and the police force and other public services to sort of stamp out the vulnerabilities in our firewalls, or whatever it is they call it technically, but also just to ensure that those measures are translating into other public services, so we're not affected again? Because I know nationally there's things going on with Transport for London, etc., but regionally, obviously, our funding is different, so it'd be good to know what's happening with that.
The expertise there lies within the force, and so it's the force that's liaising with public bodies about, as you say, firewalls and cyber security and so on. So the role of myself and the OPCC is to check that they're doing their job properly, if you like. Last time we looked at that, I was very impressed at what they were doing. I mean, if you particularly want me to raise this with the Chief Constable, I'm perfectly happy to do that. We don't do it ourselves. The expertise sits within the force and we monitor what they're doing.
But I think you were next.
Yes, thank you. It was along a similar vein of shoplifting. And well, you saw Politics Live the other day, and of course it was raised there with about the £200 limit. So that's there, that says if £200 we're not going to do anything. And we're trying to raise the issue globally to say, can that ceiling be stopped? Simply because I can understand that if you pitch a Mars bar, the cost and benefit of that is something you've got to consider. But by having that ceiling, a lot of people can do a lot of £200 worth of damage. And it's trying to raise the bar and say, yes, something will happen. And also to look at the industry itself, the shops and not the shop workers. And I've got a video here of shoplifting, white blazing, walking into the shop, two people empty the shelves out, walking straight out, nobody challenged, everything else. Why? Well, because they've been told not to. Quite right too. There's one recently who's just been punched in the face by the shoplifter. They've caught that person anyway, which is good. So it's trying to get the businesses themselves to take it seriously, and not to rely on the write-offs at the end of the year and they get a benefit from that, because it doesn't do anything. The confidence of ring the police won't do anything. So again, the poor old police get battered because they won't do anything. And that's the feedback I keep getting from one in Boots in Wixton, bike at the shop, empty the bucket out. The people in the shop won't do anything about it. You ring the police, they say, well, might come or not. Then it took an intervention by us to say, you will do something about it because, and they caught the person on the next day, which is fine, but it took all that effort to try and get something done about that. So it's the process and getting people on board to allow us to do more and to be able to get the perpetrators, whether behind bars or whatever. Very difficult as an ex-magistrate dealing with that sort of thing. It is difficult for those people as well. So is there any possibility that that could be challenged by yourself at a higher level?
Okay, so strictly speaking, the £200 limit isn't that nobody will do anything. It's not going to go into the criminal justice system. And the emphasis is on out-of-court disposals and such like. So we're running, or the police are running, a trial system up in Melton Mowbray at the moment, which relies on criminal behaviour orders, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and getting those criminal behaviour orders on particular people and affecting where were they allowed to go. So I think at the moment, don't quote me on this, but I think at the moment 3 people are banned from Melton Town Centre and 2 more are banned from specific streets in Melton Town Centre. So I could be getting that wrong. We're also looking at other out-of-court disposals for shoplifting. I think a key problem historically here is that shoplifting has tended to involve relatively small amounts of money and has been non-violent and at a very low level in terms of crime generally, and therefore it's not really been a priority anywhere in this country. That's now changing. People who are stealing from shops are becoming more violent. People who are stealing from shops are becoming more prolific, and some gangs which are viewing shoplifting and stealing from shops as a business, not just as a way to get a bit of extra money, maybe to feed a drug habit or what have you. And so this is very rapidly moving up the agenda, not just for myself and for the Chief Constable here, but for policing right across the country. Certainly, I think we are going to have to start looking at this £200 limit again. That was when, if you like, shoplifting was a non-violent, quite a minor crime, and you were dealing primarily with teenagers and so on. And an out-of-court disposal was effective in the vast majority of cases. That's not proving to be the case any longer. What was always a small, hard core of people who were stealing from retail outlets, who were doing it permanently, it was a way of life. That's expanding, and the out-of-court disposal system just doesn't work with them. Of course, we then circle back to the whole business about prison capacity and so on. But certainly it's rising up my agenda. I've been going to see how other police and crime commissioners deal with retail theft. I must also mention the work we're doing through bids and CSPs. We're trying to roll out the DISC system, which has been highly effective where it works properly and is done properly. And I think your patch is a good example, as is Hinckley and Ashby de la Zeus. So where it's being done effectively and you're getting buy-in from the majority of the retailers, it is hugely effective. So again, it's not just a matter of the police, it's not just a matter of catching the criminals and punishing them after the fact. It's also a matter of trying to make town centres a hostile environment for people who want to steal from shops. So that's a very long way of saying we're taking it a lot more seriously than we did 4 or 5 years ago, and we will continue to take it more seriously as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Les?
Thank you, Chair. Just one observation, then a question for you, please, Mr. Matthews. So I think collectively, the numbers that you're quoting at the top of page 18, when you do the annual numbers, it's quite disturbing, isn't it? 9,289 domestic abuse victims, 2,780 victims of sexual violence, and 156 of child sexual abuse or exploitation. Very disturbing, but I do know the force are on that one. My question really then is victim first. You say this year I've awarded nearly 2.5 million 5-year contract, £500,000 a year for 5 years. So the query is, there's a new government in place. This is retrospective to March, where are we, this year. how secure is that 2.5 over the 5 years, bearing in mind anything may change? Thank you, Chair.
Well, yes, anything may change. I'm going to look at my chief executive for this one, because as far as I'm concerned, it's a binding contract. And if the funding coming to the PCC is cut, then it is still a binding contract. That's my understanding. But chief executive?
I would concur. So that's a contract that we've signed with a provider that Rupert's committed to for the next for the duration of the contract. So that will continue for the duration of the contract. If funding is cut from the government for any other areas, then obviously we will be coming back to the Commissioner for decisions around other areas.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Matthews. Claire.
Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of dead quick ones and things that might want to come back in future, and then some other bits. So first one that's, I think, very quick. There's a good bit in here around using VR headsets for working with children of primary age around range of issues. I just wondered, and it doesn't have to be answered today, how that links to the work Warning Zone do, that lots of schools across the city and county children go to, that goes beyond this topic and covers a wider range. I'd just be interested whether there's any crossover between or any work between, because they've been fantastic, I think, for many of us in supporting children in our schools. So that was the first one. Second one, the LCJB, we had quite a lengthy discussion, it's probably 12 months ago now, around the Chief Constable picking up the chairing of that, which was quite an unusual step. It was because there were a number of issues with the LCJB at the time. It doesn't seem reflected in the report if there are still issues or if it's in a better place. Be helpful to have that, more at that. I'm happy for it to be at a future meeting, but it's just more one to come back to. Similarly, there's mention of both a hate crime panel and a hate crime hub in here, both linked to your office, and that would be good, I think, to have something back on if possible in future. And then my last bit is just a question around some of the performance stuff. So in terms of the figures that are given in terms of force performance, I think it would probably be helpful to have those in a tabular form, because it's, you look at it and it's this is good, this isn't so good, this has gone up, this has gone down. Actually, in terms of tracking year on year, I think it can be misleading, I think is probably my best way of putting it, because actually saying whether it's good or not. So easy example, rape offences have decreased a further 11.6% in the last year. Most of us would know that that is a bad thing, that actually it suggests that people are not reporting rape offences rather than that rape offences have decreased that much. Nationally, that's what it would suggest. So it's just understanding that element of it. It does say in here that it's been a particular area of focus for a number of the corporate governance boards, but further up in the report, when it talks about the corporate governance board, it doesn't seem to then pick up that as a particular issue. So I'm wondering again if we could have something back in more detail about the work done around that, so we can scrutinise that from how your office has been involved with it, rather than from the perspective of the force, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Chair. VR headsets, yes, I understand they've been very effective. I know the teams talk. The detail of that discussion with Warning Zone, I share your appreciation of Warning Zone. I think it's a fantastic organisation. The detail of that, I'm afraid I don't know. So we'll have to get back to you. The Local Criminal Justice Board, yes, I've got to pay tribute to the work the Chief Constable has done there. He has done a lot of very effective work, and it's really been helped by the fact that he's also the national lead on that subject. And I think that was one of the key points of asking him to take over. How long ago was it? 2 years ago? 18 months ago. Yeah, something like that. Is he occupying the national lead, and therefore, if you like, had levers to pull. So I've got to pay tribute to the work that he's done. As with a lot of the work that my office is responsible for, and that the Chief Constable is responsible for, the situation regarding local criminal justice boards might be changing after the change of government. So that I think that's something we might have to review. But as with so much to do when a new administration takes over, we've got to wait till the future becomes a little bit clearer before we make a firm decision on that. Hate crime panel, hate crime hub. Yeah, I'm sure we can bring something back. If you wish, fourth performance, I'm sure we can do it in tabular form. Yeah, so that's fine. As for rape at criminal, didn't we bring something on that not all that long ago? Am I dreaming? We're having. Oh no, again, if you want an update, that's fine.
I think it's on the work programme to come back at some point this year, I think, from memory. So it is coming back on the agenda. Thank you. Mohammed.
Thanks, and thank you for the report. Just a couple of questions. Mentioned that the existing commitments against growing demand on, sorry, I'm just looking at the page here. I think it's page 16 or 17. 17 refers to existing demand, increasing demand. Just wondering what that demand is. On the same page, the OPCC has secured additional amounts of 5.4, 5.6, and down to 0.4 million for 25-26. Just wondering how that will impact provision. And thirdly, there is reference to particular reference to trust, confidence, and funding. I think that's probably a survey that's been done, and I'm just wondering. So I'm just wondering which element has been impacted negatively. Is it the trust element or the confidence element? And also, finally, if I may, Chair, the issue of shoplifting, 29.1%. Surely there's probably other rationale behind that's pushing the shoplifting scenario, not just the cost of living. I'm just wondering whether there are other factors in play here as well. That, for example, substance misuse could be a factor. So I'm just wondering whether that's one of the factors. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Well, we've touched on shoplifting already. You're quite right as far as the motives for shoplifting are concerned. It isn't just a straightforward thing about the cost of living. A large proportion of shoplifters are involved with substance misuse. There are also organised gangs who seem to have identified large-scale theft from retail outlets as being a profitable business model, if I can put it like that. And again, you know, the older view of shoplifting needs to change in order to catch up with it. So you're quite right, there is a lot more going on there. As far as trust and confidence, we had a discussion at the most recent corporate governance board, which will be coming to you in future, which was talking about exactly how do we measure trust and confidence. There are a number of different measures that are bouncing around, which is the most reliable, which is the most consistent, and so on. So you'll be seeing that, but the Chief Constable and I are currently working out how do we measure it, and then how are we going to track trends and what are we going to do about it. So very topical question, thank you. Not really, it has grown out of what was going on last year, so we're sort of on the case there, but we're coming back to a future one, and I will hand over to the Chief Executive.
Just on the levels of funding that have been available every year. So that all depends on what the government announced the funding pots are that we can bid into. So we know retrospectively that we secured £5.4 million for 23-24 and 5.6 for 24-25. The government haven't yet announced what pots are available for us to bid into for next year. So it's not that that funding suddenly drops off a cliff. We're very hopeful that they'll announce similar funding pots for us to bid into, but we haven't been able to do that process yet, so it's just not confirmed.
Andrew.
Thanks, Chair. I think Sarah's already covered the point I was going to. So, okay, I was going to mention about the obviously the sexual offences and whether this is we're confident this is actually decreased rather than under-reporting. But obviously, if you're going to bring a report back, I think that'll be of great interest.
Yeah,
Hi. Just really wondering, I've noticed on the police report that there's an increase of 17,000 emergency calls. Just wondering how that sort of is consistent with a 4.3% reduction in, is there a sort of correlation between a drop in non-emergency calls along with the rise in emergency calls?
Do you want a different paper? Page 73.
Yeah, we haven't got to that.
Yeah, we're still on item 5. Yeah. I'll come back to you.
I beg your pardon.
Can I just ask a quick question on page 20? Just the map there with the dots on it about where community grant funding has gone. It seems very concentrated within Leicester City, which I kind of understand in some ways, but there are other hotspots around the county where we have a lot of crime and a lot of ASB and a lot of deprivation along with the city. So just really wondering how you identify areas that can have or encourage to put in for funding, and if we're not reaching out wide enough, what more can you do to make sure that those groups within those wider county areas in the more rural locations that do have a lot of ASB are aware of your grants, and how can they be supported to bid in?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yeah, well, as I'm sure you know, when you're doing a scheme like this, you are up to a point in the hands of who applies, and then you have to judge each application on its merits. It's also the case that for various reasons, which I suppose I don't need to go into now, Leicester and Loughborough seem to generate a lot more in ways of crime, domestic abuse and other problems than some of the other areas. I'll also add that some of these bids are coming in from organisations which have got their headquarters in Leicester, but actually do work right across the city and 2 counties, which can skew it as well. However, this is something that we picked up as well, and that's why we've been doing bid writing lessons and bid writing exercises right across the city in 2 counties to try to encourage other organisations to start putting bids in as well, not just geographically different, but also coming from different community groups and different areas in society, in order to get a much bigger spread, both across geographically and across the the different social groups and different communities that we have. So point taken. It's not quite as concentrated as it looks on the map, but the point taken, and we have got steps in place to try and broaden out how this is happening.
Sarah.
I think just in addition to that, thank you for the report, and thank you for investment, certainly in terms of DISC. The DISC gap has caused a reduction in shoplifting in Melton Mowbray. So my first point would be, if we're seeing a 29.1% increase across the force area, that might take, if you look at Melton's had a reduction, that means some other areas have had a substantial increase, even above the 29.1%. So, I think looking at that needs to be addressed. The second bit is just in relation to funding, and certainly the VRN. One of the things as chair of a local partnership, the Safer Partnership, would be, and the questions I'm asking, I know a lot of the projects are really worthwhile, but the evaluation of those and getting some of the information back to us as partnerships in terms of what's worked. We've got a hardcore of young people involved in antisocial behaviour, and seeing the headlines of who's been funded is great, but actually what worked, what actually was able to reach those young people that actually normal diversionary activities didn't engage. So some feedback on that I think would have been really useful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Happy to bring something back on how effective these things are. One of the points I must make about VRN is some of it is very long-term work, that you're starting with youngsters about the age of 9, 10, 11, and you're doing work with them with a view to stopping them getting sucked into crime and being vulnerable to being preyed on by criminal gangs when they get to be 14 or 15. So some of it is very long-term work. It's also difficult to measure what didn't happen as opposed to what did happen, but you can put in way markers. So let's think. Let's say you're running football coaching sessions for youngsters from an area where statistically they might be falling victim to crime or becoming involved in crime. It's difficult to measure whether that's actually stopped anything. What you can measure is how many of them are attending the coaching lessons. There's no point putting on an activity aimed at local youngsters if they don't turn up to it. So there are things you can measure, even if sometimes what you're actually trying to stop or trying to achieve is 5 years down the line. You can measure the intermediate points. So, but I think we can bring, or we could ask VRN to provide the material for that.
Yeah, I'd just add specifically on the VRN, evaluation is something that is built into their programme of delivery. So as part of the funding that we get from the Home Office, we have to have a data and evaluation lead built into the VRN, and they regularly take reports back to the Strategic Partnership Board on the kind of evaluation of their activity, and then it goes into their annual report. So we can certainly bring some of that back, but it's just to reassure you that the evaluation, certainly for the VRN, is kind of baked into the programme.
I think it's just, that would be really useful to come back to the community safety partnerships about what tactics have used. You know, very kindly, you've given us a response fund this year. And in terms of determining who we award some of that to, I'd like that learned knowledge from the VRN and the work that they've done, especially in those really hard to reach young people. Thank you.
I'm just trying to find, I'm not quick enough. We have our meeting on Friday, which is our community safety strategy group for Leicestershire and Rutland. And I'm sure I've read some stuff either in the next paper or previously about the evaluation of the admissions to hospital with knife crimes and all that. So there is a reduction in that. So there is stuff happening, but like the PCC said, it's very hard to measure prevention rather than that. So I know we do have something coming to that. So you probably find some details online if it's not come to that one. I can't find the agenda quick enough to let you know. Les.
It's just a quickie for Sarah, and because Claire or Rupert can probably get hold of it, the VRN annual report's really enlightening. It's really, really informative. So if you need the background as to kind of activities, diversion activities, interventions and successes, if you must have a copy somewhere that you can get hold of. It's a really enlightening report. Thanks, Chair.
It is that they're all available on the VRN website, and if you want any more detail beyond that, I know Grace is always happy to talk to people about the evaluation of the projects they've been involved in.
So I've just managed to check, and you just tell me it's not on this agenda, but it's on the work programme coming up. So useful to read that. So we do have quite good updates on that through that committee as well. Any other questions on the annual report? No, thank you very much for that. So on to item 6, so the Police and Crime Commissioner's update, pages 39 to 48.
Thank you, Chair. Well, again, I'm going to assume that everybody has read their way through this. Again, I'll pick up a couple of points. So page 41, the map, I think just a couple of things to point out there. First of all, it's looking a little empty compared to normal. That's because we had the 2 elections in the meantime, which rather cramped my style in getting out and about. The other thing I'll say is that with this revised format for the map, which I think is a lot clearer, it does perhaps give the impression that when I went to Harbour Council area, I only went to Market Harbour, which wasn't the case. I also went to quite a few points running out to the east of Market Harbour and some of the villages and so on. So this is, if you like, pointing at the council area where I went to, but it doesn't mean I only went to where the point is, but in the effort to make the map a wee bit clearer. I'm going to say that if you look at paragraph 12, these are the themes that have mainly come up. Unsurprisingly, shoplifting is there, and business crime more generally. That's, if you like, the category, but we are really talking about shoplifting, assaults on staff, and crimes that go on in shopping streets. is what is being dealt with there. I think that paragraph 21 is reflecting something which, in my opinion, is going to become more important as we move forwards, and that is empowering small community organisations to do work themselves. So it's not just a matter of giving out funding, as we saw with the grants bid, but also offering training, offering advice, offering information. Because a lot of small community groups do want to improve their area, but they haven't got the specialist knowledge to do it. So I'm looking to be working with that, but I think my deputy will be dealing with some of that in her report under the HEAP project. So there. When we get to paragraph 34, we're talking about community safety partnerships, and I know a lot of you, of course, are involved in your own community safety partnership, so maybe not at this meeting if it gets a bit too technical, but I would be looking for your feedback on how you think we're handling community safety partnerships, the interaction between my office and your projects, because again, I think that's going to become increasingly important in the not too distant future, again, as a means of empowering our communities to make themselves safer and to provide them with the information and expertise that they need. Beyond that, I'm just going to assume you've read the report, and again, happy to answer questions, Chair.
Thank you. And just a quick point from me, it was good to see that some of the impact of the work that's been undertaken in the report as well, which I think the panel were asking for. It's so what's the impact? So that's good to see some of that stuff in there. So I've noticed Sarah first, so I'll hand over to her.
So you asked for feedback on CSP, so I'm happy to give that. I think it's fair to say I've been working quite a lot with your team over the past few months, because certainly the information we were receiving didn't quite make sense for the city, and I think it's been a real challenge, an uphill battle, but the team have been fantastic at working with us to get the right data, how we want it presented. I think we've still got some teething issues. It's quite different looking at it across the whole city than it is looking at it for a single district area. The reality in terms of the scale of what we're picking up, but also how neighbourhoods function in the city is a different ball game, I suppose it's fair to say. So yeah, thanks to the team for continuing to work with us on that, and on looking at how we can make the bid process make more sense on that basis. It has been appreciated. So that was the first thing. Second is point 42. You've got about 4 new members have been recruited to the panel, the ethics and transparency. I was trying to get the right words out then and they weren't. Thank you, Deborah. Just a question, are they additional members? Are they replacement members? What size is the panel now and how were they recruited?
Okay, well, first point, I will happily pass on your thanks to the people in my office that work on that. I'm sure they'll be pleased to hear their work is appreciated. Regarding the ethics and transparency panel, I think they're replacement members. I can turn to you for that one.
I think when we recruited last time, we didn't manage to fill all the slots because we didn't have enough interest. So this was a recruitment because some of those are coming up to the end of their tenure, and it was an opportunity to replace some that were stepping down and also fill the empty slots that we had based in the terms of reference. So there are extra in terms of there will be more people in seats, but not extra in terms of the intention of the panel in the first place, if that makes sense.
So how many was there? How many is there now? And how were they recruited?
And there you're going to test my memory and my knowledge, and I will have to make it accurate. I'll have to come back to you.
If it helps, I've already asked for the recruitment process to go up on the website because I think it's important that people know, particularly when you're dealing with a panel that operates independently, what the appointments procedure was, because obviously the appointment isn't independent, even if they're independent once they get in place. So I have already asked for that to go on the website, but certainly we'll get it to you.
Liz?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the for table 1. I do like tables, and it's great to see a table being included in the report. On the Pathfinder driving course, it's the second time of driving course that you're offering. I looked into it because my children are in the appropriate age range, and unfortunately I couldn't afford to take a week off work to spend with them doing this. I just wondered, given that you've only got 25 doing this for 30,000, how you felt that compared with the other driving course that is offered through the county. Now, I know the funding is slightly different on that, but it did seem to me that asking a parent to spend a whole week with their young person driving around was maybe a little bit much, and how you felt it was working.
Okay, well, I did go out for a morning, spent a morning with them when this was going on. As with any project, I think it's worth trying different things. So yes, it is different, and yes, this does involve input from the parents, which perhaps other courses don't. But as with everything, you know, you evaluate it, you have a look at it, you see if you think it's open enough. And I take your point about a lot of parents can't afford to take a week to go and do this. But as far as the course itself is concerned, I thought it's hugely valuable. We spoke to both the teenagers and the parents that had been on the course. They were absolutely unanimous in saying that it absolutely hit the spot. But again, you know, it's the sort of thing you evaluate, but you're trying to fish in different pools, if that makes sense. And one thing suitable for one group of people, not for another, and then a different one suits them, but not the first bit. But I think my chief executive wants to say something.
I would just add into that, just on the funding, that the £29,290 is a multi-year funding deal. So this is a 3-year programme. So I just didn't want anyone to go away thinking this was kind of £30,000 just for this year and just for 25. This will be multiple courses over the next 3 years.
Can I ask how many?
We can come back to you about that. I don't have the detail.
Liz?
Thanks, Chair. Just with your indulgence, because we do operate in parallel worlds and partnership working, and this forum interfaces with that forum. In here, we're talking about road safety, interface with the police. Of course, in some authority areas, the Police and Crime Commissioner has responsibility for fire and rescue as well. I had the weirdest experience a couple of weeks ago that I actually went into the fire and rescue virtual reality hazard driving thing. And I'll tell you why it was even more surreal. The road they used is literally around the corner from where I was born and bred. So as soon as I got in, I put, hey, oh, hang on, I know this bit. What we've asked the rescue service, or particularly the road safety team, to look at is, can they look at also doing one for e-scooters and e-cycles, because they are becoming a bigger and bigger and bigger issue. So I don't know whether Mr. Matthews, with his role as PCC, can pick that up as well, but I think there's probably an opportunity for a bit more joint working on that particular area. Thank you, Chair.
Just picking on that, I know a lot of the planning authorities as well are looking at active travel and picking more cycleways and walkways, and we're ending up with e-scooters that have been adapted slightly, that go extremely fast in these cycleways. So I think it is becoming more and more of a problem. So yeah, that'd be quite interesting. But I've also done that VR, and it's quite scary when you're in there, isn't it?
Just to comment from young people's perspective, they have actually said there's not a lot of awareness around e-scooters, in the sense what they're accessing, as in what are they allowed to do and what are they not allowed to do. So when they have been stopped being on an e-scooter and being told it's against the law in certain areas, etc., they've not been aware of that. And I know there's recently been a few prosecutions about that and being heard at the Out Court Disposal panel. So whether literature needs to be done which is more accessible to young people in particular.
Yeah, well, I've said before and I'll say again, the law on all of this has been unclear and is unclear. And I certainly think that one thing would be a huge help, and you've highlighted it here, is just as if you buy a packet of cigarettes, it tells you what the likely consequences of that are going to be for your health. If you buy an e-scooter, there should also be clearly displayed what the law is and where you can use it and where you can't use it. Because at the moment, you're quite right. I was speaking to a young person myself about a month ago now, who'd got an e-scooter for their birthday, and he just opened it and thought, great, I've got an e-scooter, I've tried my friends out, now I've got my own, and was off. And there was nothing on the packaging, there was nothing in the packaging, nobody had explained to that young person what they could and couldn't do, and as far, like you say, as far as she was concerned, fine.
I know the police did run a campaign probably a little while ago now about e-scooters that can only be used on private land, but I think you're right, there is not enough awareness of where you should or shouldn't ride an e-scooter and how dangerous they are in the wrong hands. And also the power packs have caused quite a few fires nationally, but also locally as well. So I think there is a real issue with e-scooters that probably need addressing more nationally than we can do locally. Any more comments on this report? No? Okay, thank you very much. So we'll move on to item 7, the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner's update, pages 49 to 56. Rana, are you taking us through this?
Thank you, everybody. And yeah, I would like to present my report that the Police and Crime Commissioner has tasked me with, as you can see, the list of summary responsibility of the portfolio of activity that I was supposed to follow. You possibly have read the report already, but I'll highlight some areas that I've been working on. As you've been hearing about the victim side of things, the support for victims, I've been working on a project for victims. The aim is to obviously give them a voice, to ensure that they're represented at the OPCC and our commissioning cycle. And it's to follow the Victims of Code of Practice and the Forces Victim Strategy as well. So that, as well as the HEAP programme, and I've been covering the due diligence, going out and about visiting projects. And you mentioned the ethics and transparency meetings. I've attended 2 of those since June. Once when I first got in and once just recently, where they deal with various issues as well as dilemmas, emerging issues and dilemmas that are of concern to the wider public, and the ethics and transparency panel scrutinise them in detail, and I also am part of that. I also attended the Association of the Police and Crime Commissioners meeting earlier in the earlier when I joined again, and I represented the association there, where they talked about road safety and various other issues, and one of them, I think somebody mentioned international cyber catastrophe as well. So I mean, obviously it can impact anywhere, can't it? So I just wondered if there's any questions that the panel would like to ask at all.
Thank you. Any questions? Sarah?
Yeah, thank you for this. You've clearly been going to a lot of places. It's harder to understand the impact of those visits and the attendance at things. So the very last point you've got about how it's feeding into things, but other than that, it's really, really hard to see. So for instance, with the commissioning process and the visits you're undertaking as part of the commissioning process, what are you doing as part of that? What are you taking back? How is that making a difference? It'd be really helpful in this. And I know we've had this discussion previously around the Mr. Matthews update report, and that's changed, but understanding the difference between attending something and having an impact, it would be really helpful for us to understand.
So I think the projects and those running it, delivering the services, they're really pleased to see somebody from the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner coming out to meet them. Sorry, you can hear me. To meet them and to see what their projects are all about. And for me as well, it's been really interesting to see what they actually do for the amount of funding they do get. And so I asked them a couple of questions about what the impact it had on the community, what kind of engagement they'd had with the local youngsters, for example, the service users, project users, and various other questions. And what I found is that actually all the visits that I made, people were really saying about how the engagement was massive, and they couldn't do enough, or there was more than demand for the services that they were providing. And the outcomes are usually, the impact is great to the community, because they are not only, sorry, are you waiting to say something?
Sorry, just to clarify, I didn't want the impact of the project. I was trying to understand the impact of your visits. So do you go with a prescribed list of questions that you then fold back into the commissioning process? Because the questions you're asking are ones I'm sure we would all ask when we go to visit a project, but that's a visit that isn't necessarily having an impact on the commissioning process. So I was just trying to understand where you sat in that commissioning cycle.
So yeah, I've been meeting with the commissioning team recently, and we're trying to sort of design a programme of events so that the commissioning cycle can come in-house, to ensure that the commissioning is going out to well-deserved projects, and that they are spending the money on the projects as per contract. So I come back and actually let them know how the project's been, how the project is going, because I think it's important, rather than on the contract you can write that we're doing X, Y, or Z, but until you go and see the project and you see where the money's been used, because it is taxpayers' money at the end of the day, it's important that it's used in the best way.
It'd be really helpful if in a future one it'd be maybe possible to see a template of how that works, because I'll use an example. As a governor, if we go in to do a visit in a school, we usually have to say what we're going in to look at, what we've seen, what it links to, and then what we've reporting back on. And it'd just be really helpful to get a sense of how that fits within that commissioning process, so we can understand how that's then feeding into the wider bit of information.
Sure. Go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you for your report. One or two questions. First of all, you mentioned that at the recent conference you took a number of ideas and you were going to feed it into the police crime plan. I'm just wondering whether you could give me some more details on what particular things that you'll put in. Maybe I've misread it. Secondly, obviously we were aware of the riots that occurred recently, and you'd attended a conference. Was there any kind of sharing of information or understanding of the impact on authorities about the particular riots? Thanks.
Not sure I attended conference that you referred to, unless you. Oh, that in London. Sorry. Yes. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, that is on a national basis. They were discussing, but I didn't have any sort of. I mean, I fed back what I could, but obviously things were going for a review possibly at the time.
I was going to say, if I may, Chair, on this particular subject, obviously we in Leicestershire and Rutland, we escaped the worst of the violence that happened elsewhere. In large part, that's down to the outreach work that the police had been doing with our local communities and the ability they had to scotch misinformation and stop rumours from getting a grip. Also partly just luck that troublemakers from outside decided not to come here, which was great. But we have been looking just at the last Corporate Governance Board about the review that was done internally about the police response to the trouble 2 years ago, and how recommendations are being put in place. And at the next Corporate Governance Board, we are going to be looking at lessons to be learned from elsewhere and looking forward, because as I'm sure everyone here is aware, the disorder that happened this summer in other parts of the country was a different motivation, if I can put it that way, to the disorder that unfortunately happened in Leicester a couple of years ago. So I think it would perhaps be more productive if we came back to this panel in maybe a next meeting or maybe the one after, depending on how we work things through with the Chief Constable, with a more in-depth look at this, because as I say, we had a lot of trouble 2 years ago, but we didn't this year, but there are important lessons to be learned. So I think it might be more productive to come back a little bit further down the line.
Can I just ask a quick question as well?
you've got in there that you've gone to meet the community leaders in the people zones. I just wonder who the community leaders are that you're discussing things with in those areas.
Yeah, the community leaders are, I think it's 20, a group of 20 people, primarily, I think, from people zone areas. They're sort of interviewed and brought into a program, a 12-week program, so that where they're trained to learn how to sort of, I think, even go as far as bid writing as well, and learning leadership skills, which they then go on to eventually setting up CICs, so companies of their own, which then go on to supporting youngsters to deter them away from crime, and organise diversionary activities in their own sort of enterprises, so to speak, so that they go through a programme. And I attended 2 showcases actually, where they present their various presentations, and it can be anything from music to poems to activities that will engage with young people. Many of the community leaders have themselves probably gone through similar issues as they were growing, and so that they are kind of have that lived experience, if you like, and able to engage with youngsters, become sort of leaders in their own rights.
Thank you. Any other questions? Kevin.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Table 1 at the top. I'm grateful that you made some report on the, I assume that's the target hardening and the safer streets funding, which has gone down very well, I hasten to add. I think it's important to stress that going back to a point that Les made earlier on about the funding for that. And that's in partnership with the 3 partners, which is the Community Safety Partnership, the police and the Office of Police and Crime Commission. Match funding through the Home Office, and successful we were too, and that's grateful. Les made the comment about funding, 5-year funding, is it safe? I don't think it's safe with any government, because the Safer Streets money was a 2-year programme, and the second year was money fully went down the pan, stopped completely. Not completely, there's a certain amount of money left, so it doesn't matter who's in, Les, it could happen any time, it could. But I'd like to pay homage to the fact that the partnership through the Safer Streets and SAG, of course, where we meet regularly. We've got a meeting tomorrow, and how quick and how efficient it all worked, and how quick we got the packs out to those residents who were earmarked because they met the criteria, and is on target. In fact, I think it's probably met the target even before that. Yeah, so can I send my thanks on to those people who did it? But let's recognise it's a partnership approach. Please, I'm pleased that the police are starting to get a bit more recognition, because there's so much bad publicity at the moment. If you think of data protection, which police have been hammered for in certain cases, and it's highlighted in the press, and you talk to the police, talk to people and say, the police have got a bit of a bad name at the moment. So we've got to do something about that as well to lift that up. And I think this is probably one way of doing it. But my grateful thanks to the partnerships who have done all of that. And we're working on it, and we're meeting tomorrow, and we'll probably share the success to you further down the line. Thank you.
Yeah, as you can see, the residents who live in Oadby, for example, I went out to meet them, and they were sort of saying that these safety security kits did make them sort of reassure them. Obviously, another resident commented that, police do get a bad name, but actually they do a good job, really, in actual fact. Thank you.
It's just a question of recognising the partnership, which would be useful if in the future that it's recognised through this. Going back to you about saying how good the partnerships work throughout Leicestershire. Again, a recognition would be useful if you wouldn't mind, if that's okay. But thank you for the report anyway.
Any other questions? No? Okay, thank you very much for that. We'll move on to item 8, the neighbourhood policing, pages 57 to 62.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so neighbourhood policing is a very important element in the business of keeping communities safe and viable, which I referred to earlier. But of course, neighbourhood policing is just one part of the importance of keeping neighbourhoods safe and viable. Also, Neighbourhood Watch has a role to play in the two counties. Parish councils have a role to play within the city. There are community groups and so on, which also have a role to play in that whole business. And neighbourhood policing is a very important part of that. And neighbourhood policing is particularly important because it is about neighbourhoods. You know, it is not well, it does touch. I was going to say it's not about individual crimes and individual victims. Of course, that is dealt with under neighbourhood policing. Neighbourhood police officers do deal with individual crimes, individual victims, and individual criminals. But it's much more than that. It's also about working with the neighbourhood, working with the communities, working with other organisations that are there. And I think it's that network of which neighbourhood policing is a part, which is just so extremely important. And for all of us, whether we live in city or one of the two counties, will be aware of the web into which neighbourhood policing sits. I'll just touch on a couple of things again, if I may. Some changes that have happened that the Chief Constable has brought in, and which I have agreed with. So paragraph 27 is talking about a change in the structure of how neighbourhood policing is working. That has had a massive impact, I think particularly in the city, that having a more senior officer and more management, I know management can get a bad name at times, but when you're dealing with communities and working with a whole raft of different community groups and organisations, you really do need to have a proper management structure, and a more senior police officer dealing with that carries more clout, both with the organisations that he or she is working with, and perhaps more importantly, within the police force itself when it comes to getting buy-in and cooperation from others. So that's been a big improvement, as I say, particularly in the city, but also in the larger, more spread out neighbourhood policing areas that are out in the county to have that impact. The other thing that I think the Chief Constable would be very annoyed if I didn't mention is the business of protests and assemblies, which has become a lot more frequent over the past couple of years, and they've become bigger over the past couple of years as well. That's had two impacts on neighbourhood policing. First of all, when police get advance notice if there's going to be a demonstration or a march or something of that order, it's really important for the Gold Commander, the police officer who's going to be organising the police response, to talk to the neighbourhood officers who know the area and who know some of the individuals who might be taking part in a demonstration. And inevitably, that's taking that police officer away from their routine work or abstracting them, if I can put it like that. The other impact that this has is that very often the police operation may need additional support either at short notice or even on the day, because these, as you can imagine, a demonstration that's will attract a lot more people on a nice sunny day than it does when it's pouring with rain. And sometimes, again, that leads to neighbourhood officers being extracted, not just in the neighbourhood where the demonstration is taking place, but from other neighbourhoods as well. If there's a sudden need for more police officers, they've got to come from somewhere. And very often it's a matter of who can get here quickest, and that's very often a neighbourhood police officer who's already on duty, rather than calling in somebody who's off duty and is going to take time to arrive. That has been causing increasing problems and challenges within the Leicestershire Police as the number of demonstrations and the size of demonstrations has increased. As I mentioned earlier, the Leicestershire Police do an enormous amount of work reaching out into communities, getting to know people, and that allows them to predict much more accurately than I think would have been the case 3 or 4 years ago what sort of policing operation is going to be necessary. But nevertheless, it does have an impact on neighbourhood policing. So I just wanted to highlight those two features, if I may. But again, as always, happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Les.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Matthews. It's not a question, it's really just an observation. So firstly, I acknowledge that whether it's my district or my county ward, I'm very lucky that we have a very, very low crime rate. As members around this table, we wear different hats, and some of us are extremely privileged to have a line into the area commander. And I'm very pleased. I've got a stunningly good area commander, and I've got a very good beat sergeant. Where I think we fall short, and it really is about this neighbourhood bit, even in a very low crime area, I never see anybody. I see the occasional Bobby or PCSO drive through. And I think, you know, part of the game surely is about community assurance that they are there. Whether there's anything untoward going on or not is neither here nor there. It is, if they're driving through the village, can they not at least stop and just say hello to a resident or a shopkeeper or the local pharmacy, or councillors or somebody, rather than just drive through and go, yeah, there's nothing going on here. So I think there is a bit of a trick that's missing, and I absolutely accept, you know, within the Blaby district, and I'm not going to go into details, most people around this room will be very aware of a very recent incident, and it's absolutely right that all the resources are thrown in that direction, absolutely right. But outside of those urgent, important issues, I think there is a need for society to actually see more of the beat officers and the PCSOs especially, because that's their primary role. So it's just something for you, I think, Mr. Matthews, to take back to the chief. You and I have spoken about it before anyway, but I think there is a need, even in incredibly low crime areas, we still need to see that bit of assurance. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Matthews.
If I may, Chair, first of all, thank you for emphasising the importance of PTSOs when it comes to neighbourhood policing, providing reassurance, gathering local information, and knowing what's going on within the community. One of the things I have asked the Chief Constable to put together is to sort of try together in one document what it is that communities can expect from neighbourhood policing. Now, obviously, it won't be possible to deliver all of it every week or indeed every month. Emergencies happen, people are sick, officers have to go off for training and so on. But to get it down, you know, what is it reasonable for a community to expect from the Leicestershire Police? And I think having that and distributing it out to you as councillors, to parish councillors and neighbourhood watch and so on, I think that will help with trust and confidence. It also will help with transparency, but also it will, I think, deal with your concern about the fact that you never see anyone. Well, if you know, okay, you know, the PCSO is supposed to visit your village, I don't know, once a fortnight and go and talk to people, or you're supposed to have a police officer at your parish council once a year, or, you know, whatever it is, I think that will go a long way to dealing with this, because you're quite right. In a low crime area, you won't see the police. Because the police go where there is crime, the police go where there are criminals, and the police go where they've got a serious job to do. But I do take the point about assurance, and I think if you know what you're meant to be expecting, then that's going to help everybody.
I mean, I think it's really difficult, isn't it? I know my local police team are out and about walking around, but if I'm not looking out my window at the minute that they walk past my house, I'm not going to know that they've been on the beat that day unless I see something on social media. So I think that's the perception of the public. I never see anyone looking around, and I think, well, unless you're looking out your window 24/7, you might not see the police in your area, but we know they're there. But I think that if we do know that they're there and they are walking around and they will respond, and you see them at parish council meetings, that does offer you that assurance that they are there, even if you don't see them all the times. But I think that's the most I get, and probably all of us as local members, is, oh, you never see a policeman anymore. I think, well, sometimes that's a good thing, isn't it? Because there's no crime. But yeah, I take your point that you do just want to see them occasionally popping up at parish council meetings and in your village centre or wherever they're hanging around. But I know mine do really visual surgeries, and they're always advertised on Facebook and stuff. So they always have regular resident surgeries. So hopefully others are experiencing that as well. Les?
Can I come on that? So I think, and again, it's one for Mr. Matthews to take away. So, you know, it's not that we never, ever see them. It's that we occasionally see them drive through the village. And actually, there's an opportunity to actually stop the car and have a walk round rather than just go around the prescribed route. As far as the, I forget what they call them. So the PCSO's doing, it's a community kind of pop-up thing. Well, it's fine if you're following the social media that the police are advertising on. I mean, I had one, and I can speak relatively freely because the PCSO is along with us. They turned up at the local co-op car park, sat in the car, and stuck a board at the back of the car. You think, and I actually thought, oh, okay, why are you here? Oh, well, I'm doing this community engagement event. Well, no. Yeah, I think there's an opportunity, Mr. Matthews, for the chief to ramp it up a bit.
Christine.
I've been amassing points as we were sitting here. First of all, I have to say the neighbourhood policing for us in Rutland is key to keeping our low crime rate. They're part of the intelligence network, and without that local network, our crime rate would likely be much higher. So I totally support it. But very sad that on the day I sat down to read this report, I'm told that we're not going to have an Oakham beat officer. The funding isn't there. And so our county town will be the one area in Rutland not to have a beat officer. I don't know if a business case was being put together. The situation may have been remedied between, but it hadn't last time I spoke to someone. And I do think that's incredibly important, that local people have a name, that they have a name that they can email if nothing else, that they know somebody they can contact. On the visibility, on the plus side, beat officer in the north of the county last night wasn't summoned to do response elsewhere and was pulling over every farm vehicle with a tractor, travelling after 10 o'clock at night, because in most cases they are trailers that have been removed without the farmer's permission. In all three cases that he pulled over, they were actually legitimately working late, but were absolutely delighted to have been pulled over because it meant that they'd seen the police were actually doing what they asked them to. So there is the two sides to it.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. Sarah.
Unlike my colleagues, I do not live in a very low crime area. In fact, I probably live in one of the highest crime areas, and have a fantastic local beat team, but who are very often pulled out onto other duties. So my two questions for Mr. Matthews are as follows. The first is, are you confident that there is sufficient regular resource being left in neighbourhoods to be able to fulfil their duties, so that they're not being pulled off consistently into other places? You mentioned protest. There are a number of other opportunities that people do get moved. My own patch is linked to the city centre, and you can imagine things get scooped away on a fairly regular basis. And the second, and I was waiting deliberately to come after Les because I thought he'd raise it and he didn't. I was giving you scope ready for you. Was the question about that we've asked before, and I think was the reason that we asked for this report to come, which was around consistency of teams and the frequency of moves, and whether you have had any, have sought or have had any assurance from the Chief Constable about people's opportunity to build relationships within a local community for long enough to be able to do effective neighbourhood policing. Because as Christine's just said, it's about relationships, whether that be the beat officer or the PCSO. What you need is somebody who knows your community well enough to know who the individuals are, who's ringing because they always ring, who needs a bit of extra assurance, which shops need that general reminder that actually, you know, you do need to keep an eye on so-and-so when they're coming in. Whatever it is, our neighbourhood teams, when they work well because they've got really long established officers. I'm absolutely delighted one of my officers has been on our beat for 10 years. I can't begin to tell you the difference that makes to our local community, knowing him, knowing that he knows what goes on in our patch, being able to help new people come in. So yeah, it's that sense of how do you get assurance both of people being able to have sufficient time week by week on the beat, but also sufficient time in their career to develop that neighbourhood relationship.
Okay, thank you. I'll start with your bit about your particular area being scooped into this can actually set up a ripple effect where yours gets through and then the next one comes in, and so it can be very complicated. Am I confident that there is always sufficient resource in every area? The answer to that has got to be not really, because we've not actually been measuring it up till now. So if I can take you back to the abstraction thing, some abstractions are regular. So if a police officer's being sent away for training or whatever, you can plan that and you know what's happening and so on. When it's more ad hoc abstraction, it hasn't always been recorded. And so the Chief Constable and I have now agreed that as of when it's going to be recorded, I can't remember. Thank you. We're going to be recording this so that we can actually know what the true situation is, because up until now, because it's been quite ad hoc, it's almost down to the local NPA commanders looking out the window and saying, yeah, well, I'm sure we can spare this officer for a day, or we can't spare that officer for a day, we'll have to spare another one. But we haven't been tracking it, so we don't know the answer. All I can say is there haven't been any obvious gaps which have leapt up and caused a real issue, but that's not the same as having confidence. But hopefully going forwards, we will. As regards the consistency, congratulations on having an officer for 10 years. I think everyone around this table would be very jealous of you indeed. This, however, is one of those really difficult issues. You're absolutely right. From the point of view of a neighbourhood or a beat, consistency is key. From the point of view of the force-wide policing, it's just one element to take into effect. And I think in two areas. First of all, when it comes to retaining police officers, a lot of police officers like to get experience of they like being on traffic patrol for 2 or 3 years, then they want to be armed response for 2 or 3 years, then they want to do neighbourhood policing for 2 or 3 years. That's very important in terms of retaining good police officers, that they do have variety in their jobs. Another aspect of it is that senior commanders need to know what the different officers have got experience of, what they are trained in and what they're capable of doing. And from their point of view, it's a huge advantage to have a team of officers who have got experience of doing lots of different things, because then when an emergency happens, when there's a crisis, instead of having to look around and think, oh, good heavens, who's got experience in this? And then it takes time, first of all, to identify who's got the right experience and then go and find them and pull them in. If they know, yes, we've got lots of officers who've got experience with lots of different things, it makes that sort of emergency response from the police a lot easier for the senior officers to deal with. So from the point of view of the public, and like you, I'm a representative of the public, yes, having consistency is absolutely essential. From the point of view of managing a police force, it's only one element within managing the police force. That's where PCSOs can be so important, because they're not going to get pulled out of an area to go and deal with a murder investigation or to go and deal with public disorder. And so with them, you do get the consistency. And I think this is why the role of a PCSO is so important when it comes to neighbourhood policing. There you do tend to get more consistency. It's where you get the local knowledge and so on. I'll take your point. If the Chief Constable were here, he'd be talking about what's his favourite? Not multi-faceted. Omnicompetent, thank you. Omnicompetent police officers and how important that is, together with the importance of retaining good officers and giving them what they want to see in terms of career development.
Just on the PCSO front, I absolutely agree. They are an amazing resource in our communities. I've certainly found, though, that a number of them are staying for even less time than our police officers, because they're using that as their experience to go on and then join the police. So I think how we get that right collectively in terms of getting enough resource that stays in neighbourhoods is important.
Mohammed.
Chair, 2 questions. One is point 10. Due to the fiscal challenge and the force requirement, it may be necessary to, in the coming years, to revisit numbers allocated to neighbourhood police. I'm just wondering what that really means in figures and the front line. And secondly, it says on 27F, average investigation length has increased since 2023 October, but coupled with increased outcome indicates improved victim care. I'm just trying to understand whether investigation time length is increasing. Is that down to resources or the nature of the investigation or the type of crime? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. On paragraph 10, I'm afraid I can't give any facts and figures on this because we haven't done it yet. But what that's highlighting is really that neighbourhood policing has been protected, but the time may come when it cannot be protected any longer. But as I've said elsewhere, we've got a new national government. Certainly in the manifesto, some important commitments were given about neighbourhood policing, but we've got to see how that actually plays out in reality. I mean, I'm optimistic. I think, what was in the Labour, you're probably going to have to put this in your diary because I'm not going to say it very often, that something in the Labour Party manifesto, this bit about neighbourhood policing actually sounded really positive and good. Assuming that's delivered on, then great. But we've been protecting it ourselves up till now, but the time may come when neighbourhood policing has to take its share of the pain, if I can put it that way. As regards I've lost it already, 27F, there are a number of different factors coming in here. Part of it is the increased recognition of how important victim care is during a police investigation. Partly in and of itself, it's an important thing to do. But also when it comes to getting a case to court, if a victim has been cared for, if a victim is being looked after, they're more likely to cooperate, particularly because the court delays mean that, instead of a case going to court after 5 months or so, you're now looking at delays of a year, maybe longer. And in that case, it's really important to look after victim, to make sure they're okay, to manage their expectations. And that is, you get a much better outcome of cases getting to court and what happens when it gets to court. So there, like I say, there's a number of different things coming into play there. We talked earlier about the local criminal justice board and the relationship with the courts, with the Crown Prosecution Service and so on. But yes, a lot of this has to do with court delay. So it's the system stretching things out, and that means you have to put a lot more effort into victim support.
Liz?
Thank you, Chair. It's just a sort of an observation, perhaps, for some of the newer members around the table. Certainly you'll remember, Chair, and I will remember the previous chief commenting on the number of retirees he was having to face in the next 5 years, and that is naturally going to cause a huge amount of churn within the police force. So, Sarah, we're all very jealous if you've got a beat officer that's been with you for 10 years. But I do think there's a really important point, and it's about these basics of social discipline and responsibility. Sergeant Berridge, who is long departed this world, was our local beat sergeant when I was in Nipper. But he still sits on my shoulder on his black bike, cycling around, because he was the one that taught you, I'm around, behave and be good. So I think it's a really important social lesson that Sarah's actually talking about in a roundabout way. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. I thought the report was really positive, and the value of neighbourhood policing none of us can underestimate. However, my point or my questions in relation to point 10 and 27, because we've highlighted that there's going to be an increase of a chief inspector and then 5 inspectors. I just wonder how you've been assured other areas won't be affected, because unless that's growth, I mean, if it's growth, that's an immediate, I would say, conservative cost of over 300,000. So I can't assume it's just growth. So I therefore assume it's a realignment from other areas. And whilst neighbourhood policing's really important, so is investigation of crime, so is child trafficking or child protection. So was there assurance around that? And my second question in relation to that is, in light of the cost of that, is this just a really short-term plan? And one thing the community hate is short-term initiatives. When they get used to it and they see the value of it, they want that sustained approach. And certainly for neighbourhood policing, as we've heard, sustainability is really key.
Thank you. If you were to be a fly on the wall in my office, you would know that one of the perennial topics of conversation is short-term planning versus long-term strategy. I'm with you. I think it's absolutely essential to have long-term strategies, but also, of course, you have to build in different scenarios because circumstances change, and you may have to move the chess pieces around. But if you haven't got that long-term strategy in the first place, you don't know what you're aiming at and how you can shuffle things around. So I agree with you completely on that. As regards the increase in the chief superintendent and superintendent, there are now more superintendents and chief superintendents than there were 2 years ago. So there is an additional cost to that, which the Chief Constable has incurred with my support. That said, is this a short-term measure? As with every measure of this kind, you know, there is an element of suck it and see. So it has had a massively beneficial effect. Whether we can sustain that is going to depend on what happens with the budget over the next 2 or 3 years. And of course, we don't know where that's going, nor do we know really whether the prohibition on reducing the number of police officers is going to stick or whether it won't. That's another thing that we don't know. So there are lots of imponderables. There are lots of things we don't know. What I can assure you is that this wasn't brought in with the view it's only for 1 year. So this was brought in as a long-term measure, but I can't give you a promise it'll still be there in 10 years' time. Whereas other measures that we do, yes, they're brought in for 6 months or a year to cure a problem, get rid of a backlog. This isn't one of those, but I can't give you any long-term assurance.
Are we able to measure the impact of this? I'm the same with you, long-term strategy is far better than short-term, but my other strategy is prevention is better than cure. So is this having an impact on the end result of less crime because of the work that the neighbourhood officers are doing? So in fact saves you money in the long term because there's less crime occurring. So are we measuring the impact of that additional funding that's in this area? Is it helping us to stop crime occurring?
We're measuring what's happening with crime in these areas. I'm going to have to ask the Chief Constable that one. Get back to you.
I think it would be interesting to know, because for me, that's where the money should be in neighbourhood policing.
I mean, anecdotally, when I've been out and about, it's been really appreciated by people who are active in the community, be they councillors, parish councillors, or in the city, people who are, you know, involved with different organisations. Anecdotally, I've been getting a lot of positive feedback. But a good question about crime figures. I'll have to get back to you.
Thank you, Kevin.
A couple of things, if I may. Again, everybody said it's about community policing or local policing is paramount to the success of getting the role of the police and the confidence back. You mentioned about how do you measure somebody going out and walking the streets and everything else, as you say, talking about it. Been here a long time, probably too long, but the training I had in HQ, and they talk about things like that, and they say, how do you measure somebody going out, walking the streets and everything else? You go back, the sergeant, what we've been doing. I've walked the streets and I've got a couple of lads and I've talked to them and said to them, don't do this, don't do that. Perhaps you should go home. How do you measure that? You then get told, no, you don't want to do it. You've got to look at the cars and check car registrations. I've got tax, I've got insurance. That's I can measure that. I can't measure the other. So the mindset's got to change, hasn't it? Because the prevention is having those people walking about, and they do prevent it. You can't measure that somehow. But you can on a long-term basis, because you can say, well, last year we had this year we've got that. It's probably reduced. And I envy you, Les, because you say you've got a good rapport with your commander and everything else, which I had. And the challenge for me is challenging the chief super and say, how serious does he take community safety partnerships? You take it seriously? Is the partnership going to be enhanced because he believes in that? Is there a closer working relationship that we can help each other? Which I thought that's what the partnerships are all about. Don't know what's happening just lately. There seems to be silo working. You find out about things happening when it's already happened or it's happened, and we said, well, it's in our delivery plan. Why don't you come and talk to us about it? We could have instanced it. I don't know what's happening locally in our area, and this is not a criticism. It's just probably because they're going through a restructuring, perhaps. I know they're 50% short in one area of police officers, and so they're working on that. They are. There's a deputy inspector. That's another post. I don't know whether that's a permanent post or whether that's just somebody put into that post to fulfill a role until this new structure has come about. So I'd be interested to see. It's not a criticism. I just say we want to see whether we can enhance the partnership working better. It may be working perfectly in your areas, but certainly not in mine. And although I keep trying, it's been all new people, everything else, so they've got to find the feet. So it'd be important for me to not to say anything, but to see whether we can get a better working relationship so we can get better outcomes within the area. I noticed there's another 5 inspectors who that's increased. The big double space spread in the Mercury last week that suggests there's 12 more, but that's relevant because it says 5 here. They say it's 12 more. Is that because of the structuring? 12 more inspectors when you're probably short on the ground with officers. Where are they going to get the officers from if we're going to increase inspectors? Who are they going to manage? I know there is an issue with regards to they call it police go in and then they get allocated where they've got to go, and it's that bit there that's not there in some cases. So we're having to do a bit of that working. So it's for me, it's saying, come on, tell us how you value the CSPs, and is it something that you will enhance and help us do that, please?
Thank you. I'll start by taking you back to page 43, if I may, and the Turning Point Street Outreach project. So this is a team of people who go out onto streets where antisocial behaviour is particularly bad, and they engage with, and how to put this tactfully, and they engage with people who look as if they might be involved in antisocial behaviour. Cambridge University has actually done a study on this, which quantifies the amount of antisocial behaviour that takes place when those street outreach workers are there and the amount that takes place when they're not. I can't remember offhand, but I've read the report, and it is a very marked difference. So sometimes you can measure this stuff, and can we get a copy of the report? Again, so Lloydell. The deputy inspector is a job, not a rank. So it's an officer acting as a deputy to the inspector. So they're normally sergeants, but there can be other ranks. As far as the number of extra ranks is concerned, I don't have that data here, but I'm sure we can get it to you, what the actual figure is. As for taking community safety partnerships seriously, I would hope actions speak louder than words. In my first term in office, I took quite a lot of trouble to get the relationship with community safety partnerships correct. My commitment to community safety partnerships, I don't think, is in doubt, but I will preempt what I was going to do anyway. I've already spoken to Saj in my office about this. But I think it's important that I attend a meeting of each community safety partnership during my term in office. And so if you could let Saj know all your dates, then in the course of the next 3.5 years, I'll try and get round to all of you and sit down and experience firsthand how you're working, what you're working, and what you're achieving. Okay.
Thank you. Any more questions on this paper? No? Okay, thank you very much. So on to item 9, the Corporate Governance Board update, pages 63 to 80.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not actually intending to talk about this. It's as it always is, it's quite long, and in places quite detailed. So the only thing I'm going to highlight really is paragraph 12, where it's talking about CMD response. For the first time in 35 years, possibly 40 years, I had occasion to dial 999 last Friday. And I know it's only anecdotal evidence, but the phone was answered with less than 2 rings. The person on the other end of the line was courteous, knowledgeable, and dealt with the situation. I think there was a police car there in less than 5 minutes. So from anecdotal evidence, and I know that can be very misleading, I'm going to support what he said here, and CMD response has got a lot better recently. But I'm not going to talk you through the whole thing because there's a lot there, and I think you probably heard enough from my voice already, but as ever, we're here to answer your questions.
Okay. Yeah, mentioned this when we met last week, but I do think it would be helpful to have an interim report for the board. I'm specifically referring to the transformation and change sections and the finance sections within the report. Be really helpful for us as a panel to get a sort of half-year report looking at what we were presented with as the financial picture when you brought the your financial plan back earlier on in the year. What savings have been achieved already, what's looking like it isn't to go, and what other things are now being looked at, just so that when we come up to the budget meeting, we've already got an understanding of what's been happening in the year. Thank you, Chair. Mohammed.
Thanks, Chair. Mr. Matthews, 2 questions. One is the response times of 15 minutes or so. And I'm just wondering where we got that figure from, and is it obviously I don't think there's any national comparators, but just wondering how it is compared to other force areas. And also, I understand there's an inspection in July. Just wondering when that information could be shared with the board or not shared, or how it works. Thanks.
Thank you. As response times and how it compares to other forces, haven't got that information with me, but we can do it. The Peel report, which is the inspection that took place in July, we're expecting to get the advanced copy of the report 2 weeks' time. Yeah. At which point I and the Chief Constable have the opportunity to suggest factual changes. We're not allowed to change their findings or their commentary or their views or their opinions. But if we think there is an error of fact, we have the opportunity to put that right. The inspectors will then take our comments on board and will then publish their report. So I would imagine it might, I mean, if we haven't got any factual changes to make, it could come through in 2 weeks, but if they take a little bit of time to do things, it might take 3 or 4. Imminently, I think, is the answer to your question.
Okay, any other questions? Right section now.
Yeah, so just actually I had reason to call 999 as well a while back, and I have to say it was dealt with very efficiently. Initially, we tried to call the non-emergency number, which didn't seem so efficient, so we changed plan and decided it was probably a little bit more serious than originally planned. But which really does bring me to the question on the rise in emergency numbers, 17,000. And, you know, is there a correlation between a drop in non-emergency numbers? Is it because people are struggling to get through on the non-emergency and choosing the other option? You know, and obviously, you know, you've seen a reduction in crime, which is very welcomed, obviously. But it just seems if you've got a rise in emergency calls, if some of those are reporting crimes, perhaps, is there a correlation?
Well, I'll start and then Claire might correct me or elucidate or clarify, whatever the phrase is. I think the easy answer is going to be we don't know if there's a direct correlation, because there isn't a way to measure if someone rings off from the non-emergency line, does that phone number then immediately appear in the 999 queue? We haven't got the software to do that. I think anecdotally, the answer is probably yes, but, and again, as we were saying earlier about e-bikes and the need to publicly educate people in what they can and can't do, we are making efforts to try and get people to report non-urgent stuff online, partly because it's a lot easier at our end, that you haven't got to have somebody answering the phone. You can have somebody turn up to work at 9 o'clock the following morning and work their way through the list of emails and what have you. But also, actually, for non-emergency matters, that's very often better for the person making the non-emergency report, because the form is smart in that the questions it asks are dependent on the answers you've already given. And that can mean that it's easier for the person filling it in to get the correct information across for the police to then take action. But that's a matter of educating the public to try and get them to stop phoning the non-emergency number and get them to do things online. But I think the answer to your question is probably, but we don't actually know because the software is not there to do it.
Les, I probably know what you're going to ask, but I'll let you ask it anyway.
It's a comment, Chair, if I may. I think, Mr. Matthews, it's also almost inevitable that there is a correlation between the two, and that technology is available. Depends on how you look at it and who your telephone provider is. Yeah, I think what I would just reiterate, Mr. Matthews, and I know it's an operational issue, I went online to report an antisocial behaviour issue. It was actually an illegal exhaust on a moped. And the first page, I think the second or third page, said it will take you between 15 and 20 minutes to complete this report, at which point you just abandon it, because, you know, so I think there are issues that you're already aware of, Mr. Matthews.
I'm just wondering as well, just reading that at the bottom of page 73 there about the right care, right person, that there has been a reduction in incidents created that's connected to that. So I presume that will continue over the next year as well and might reduce those emergency calls. So I just wonder how many of those emergency calls are now not listed as incidents because they're dealt with by another partner. So I suppose we're in that bit of transition period about how much you can read into these figures until we know a bit more. But I am still with Les on the abandonment rate of the online. If that's where you want people to report, you need to make it as easy as possible. So yeah, I think that is something, a key priority going forward. Any other comments or question on this paper? No? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item 10, the section 106. Just to say before you introduce this, some really good data in here, which is really, really useful for us and something that we've been asking for a while. So I was really pleased to see this come forward. I don't know if there's anything you particularly want to add to this paper or not. Any questions on this?
Thank you, Chair. I think we deserve a pat on the back, Madam Chairman, and those longer serving members who picked this up several years ago. And I am really pleased to see that the force have been able to make some progress with this, and planning officers have been responsive. I can see that there's a couple of authorities, by the looks of it, who have been a bit slow, perhaps. What I do think, though, Madam Chair, and it's absolutely one for you, Mr. Matthews, and any members who are aligned with the current government, there is now one of the challenges I constantly get told by planning officers and the policy officers is about the rigidity of the SIL mechanism and how the money can be applied. And I think, you know, fresh government, fresh face, fresh ideas, and all the other stuff that goes with it, if they can do something wonderful to help us get this money from developers into our communities in the right place at the right time, it's to look very closely at that SIL Section 106 legislation and allow our officers to write a more flexible, because it is a legal agreement at the end of the day, and that's the challenge. So it's just an observation, Chair, but I think there is a real opportunity with the new government, fresh ideas, fresh face, new initiative, new inertia to actually look at this, and even more so when they're hoping to ramp up house building significantly. Actually, we've got to get this side of the equation and the bargain right as well. Thank you, Chair.
Just I had a meeting at Charnwood to attend, and that had got money that's gone back to Section 106 that had gone back to developers, and the two areas of funding gone back in Charnwood was healthcare and police, which is, you know, when you read that, you think these residents have took impacts of development and not had that money. It's been given back to developers. So it is a real bugbear of mine, and I'm glad we've got to where we are of this. I just want to add that I have emailed the two members that belong to the two local authorities that have been written to. So please check your emails for them so you know who you are. So I won't publicly announce it, but you have been emailed. And I suppose just this, we have made progress. I did ask this to be on every agenda, but I think we've turned the corner and we're getting to where we need to be more. So I'm happy to have it less frequency, so there's not so much work, but I still want this to be priority going forward as well, if that's okay.
Just a really quick one, whether Mr. Matthews or your office has responded to the National Planning Consultation to particularly highlight the issues raised by us.
Any other questions on this? No. Okay, so we've got date of next meeting. It's scheduled to take place on the 28th of October at 2 o'clock. And as I said previously, item 12, there's no other items that are urgent. So I will close the meeting, and thank you all for your attendance this afternoon.